Have you ever seen a shadow linger in the corner of your eye, seen a flashing light dart across the sky? Have you ever wished upon a candle to make your wish come true? I'm sure you've told a haunted tale or two. Are you interested in learning the pagan ways, witchcraft, grimoires, candles await? Have you ever seen the living dead and stood still instead of fled? Cryptics are fun, but the universe has our eye. The stars align, shows us our signs, and we're here to discuss the divine. Welcome to Moon Brews, a supernatural podcast, hosted by yours truly, Haley.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home.
Hey, Kyle here. While Amanda takes a well-earned break for the holidays, we're bringing you something a little different. These stories come from beyond Canada's borders, eerie tales and mysteries that stretch far and wide. So settle in and enjoy this special off-the-map edition of Down the Crooked Path.
Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Patterns. Humans are drawn to them, compelled to find meaning in repetition and routine. Patterns can reveal the deepest truths about behavior, shaping the way events unfold and offering insight into the minds behind them, and perhaps even our own. But what happens when there is no pattern? No predictable thread to follow, no trail to decipher. How do you confront a mind that defies expectation? A mind untethered by reason or routine. There is a fine line between chaos and control. Consequently, what does it mean when there is an absence of a pattern is the most important pattern of all? Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path. Today's journey divulges into the chilling case of the Lewis Clark serial killer, a phantom whose elusive nature defies traditional criminal profiling, a place where a serial killer has left a trail of fear and confusion, families torn apart and communities shaken, and investigators left with questions that stretch across state lines for decades. There's no clear pattern that ties these crimes together, no singular method, and no discernible motive. The 1970s were a turbulent decade for crime in the United States, marked by a chilling rise in serial killings and violent crimes that gripped the nation with fear. Infamous cases like the Zodiac Killer, who taunted authorities with cryptic messages, and the Son of Sam, whose shootings terrorized New York City, and the Hillside Strangler, who preyed on women in Los Angeles, highlighted the need for a more sophisticated approach to criminal investigation. Recognizing this gap, the FBI established the Behavioral Science Unit in 1972. This groundbreaking unit aimed to study the psychology of violent offenders, developing criminal profiling techniques, and provide law enforcement with tools to anticipate and counteract such heinous crimes. The unit's creation marked a pivotal movement in the evolution of crime investigation, laying the foundation for modern behavioral analysis. This is where Patrick Mullaney and Howard Tenton came onto the scene. Tenton, a criminal psychologist with a knack for behavioral sciences, and Mullaney, a psychologist with a focus on abnormal psychology, joined the forces of the FBI's newly formed Behavioral Science Unit. Together, they spearheaded the development of criminal profiling, a groundbreaking approach that sought to understand not just the crime, but the mind behind it. Criminal profiling is more than just guesswork. It's a meticulous process that combines psychology and behavioral analysis to build a psychological portrait of an offender, and there are several elements to it. Profilers closely examine the crime scene to uncover the offender's modus operandi, or MO, and any unique signature behaviors that could point to a psychological pattern. They study victimology, analyzing the victim's background and lifestyle to determine why they were targeted. Profilers look for recurring behavioral patterns and psychological traits like impulsivity, a need to control, a lack of remorse. They also try to rely on typographies, classifying offenders into categories such as organized or disorganized to better understand their motives and methods. It begins with gathering the relevant information, such as crime scene evidence, autopsy reports, and victim profiles. This foundational stage is called profiling inputs and sets the stage for deeper analysis. Investigators then study this data to identify patterns and behaviors that hint at the offender's characteristics, a step known as decision process modeling. Next comes the crime scene assessment, where the events of the crime are reconstructed to uncover the offender's mindset and actions. Using these insights, profilers create a comprehensive criminal profile, detailing the likely demographics, psychological traits, and behavioral patterns of the offender. This profile then guides law enforcement in narrowing down suspects and focusing the investigation. Ultimately, the process culminates in the apprehension of the offender, bringing resolution to the case. With their techniques established, Mullaney and Tenton begin teaching their methods to new recruits at the FBI Academy. One of their most notable students was John Douglas, who would go on to become a legendary figure in the field of criminal profiling. He traveled extensively, interviewing some of the most notorious criminals in history, including Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Charles Manson, and Richard Speck. These interviews provided invaluable insights into the psychological and behavioral patterns of serial killers, which Douglas used to refine the profiling techniques. Douglas applied his expertise to several high-profile cases, leaving a lasting impact on criminal investigation. One of his most famous cases was the capture of Wayne Williams, the man responsible for the Atlanta child murders between 1979 and 1981. Douglas's profile accurately predicted key characteristics of the killer, including his race and his connection to the local community, which helped narrow down the investigation and ultimately led to Williams' arrest. Another significant case was that of Robert Hansen, a serial killer in Alaska who abducted women, flew them into the wilderness, and hunted them like prey. Douglas's profile identified Hansen as the skilled hunter with a stutter and a history of social awkwardness, which proved instrumental in his capture. Hansen was later sentenced to 461 years in prison. Douglas's groundbreaking work not only solved cases, but also advanced the field of criminal profiling. His ability to get inside the mind of the offenders revolutionized investigative techniques and inspired countless others in law enforcement. His legacy is so influential that he became the inspiration for the character of Agent Jack Crawford in the movie Silence of the Lambs and the Netflix series Mindhunter. Through his dedication and innovation, Douglas helped shape the modern understanding of criminal behavior and profiling. During 1979, in the Lewiston-Clarkston metropolitan area of northern Idaho, a series of murders and disappearances began that left investigators at odds with each other over who could possibly be responsible. There were seemingly no connections between the victims and discernible patterns, let alone clues that could provide the police any answers. The profiling strategy was inadequate in this case. There are those who believe that they know who is responsible. However, a lack of concrete evidence has prevented any arrests from being made. And then there are those who would argue that there is a different person accountable for each victim. Christina Lee White was a 12-year-old from Asotin, Washington, and on April 28, 1979, she attended the Asotin County Fair, an event that she had been looking forward to. White had a history of suffering from heat stroke, so when she called her mother Betty around 2:30 p.m. complaining of symptoms, her mother walked her through what to do. As Betty didn't own a car and therefore wasn't able to pick up White, she advised her to lay down with a cold, damp towel on her neck. When she would feel better, she should walk home. But her mother didn't get a call back, and as the hours passed, she assumed that White, feeling better, had returned to the fair with her friends. But by 10 p.m. that night, her mother had become concerned and went looking for her. She was not at the fair, and so her mother called the authorities. Her classmates said that when they last saw her, she had been on her way home. An extensive search gave way. Posters were hung through town. The whole community banded together. But Christina White, as well as the 10-speed bike with the white basket on the front, were never seen again. Christina's father, Gary, had a theory. He believed that she had been kidnapped by somebody who was from the county fair, and he wanted the police to search the trailers and campers. But his hunches weren't evidence, so a search warrant was never obtained. Once the fair left town, Gary actually followed it through several towns in order to conduct his own investigation. He would ask bystanders and workers if they knew anything, but this didn't yield any answers either. In Asotin, he asked a local man to borrow his plane, hoping to find some sort of clues from above, but this also didn't provide any answers. The only trace of White that would show up several weeks later, her schoolwork was found scattered and shredded in a field just outside of Asotin. Kristen David was a 22-year-old senior at the University of Idaho, majoring in broadcasting and political sciences with a bright future ahead of her. On June 26, 1981, she set off on a bicycle ride from Moscow, Idaho, headed south on U.S. Highway 95 towards Lewiston. She was headed home to visit family and start a new job. It was a route she had taken before, but this time she never reached her destination. A few individuals who had been driving on Highway 95 the day David disappeared called in with some tips. They claimed that they had seen a woman matching David's description being approached by a man in a brown vehicle traveling southbound. Other eyewitnesses reported seeing the same man having approached other female cyclists on the highway that same day. One witness, James Archibald, reported he had seen a woman in distress. She was laying on the side of the road, her bike on the ground beside her. A few paces up was a man climbing out of a brown vehicle. At the time, he assumed the man was either a part of an accident involving the woman or had pulled over to help. The man made eye contact with Archibald and smiled as he drove past. Archibald called the authorities and reported the scene, but by the time they arrived, both the woman and the brown vehicle were gone, and Archibald was actually reprimanded for false reporting. Days later, on July 4th, 1981, a fisherman made a horrifying discovery in the Snake River near Silcott Island, just west of Clarkston, Washington. He found a black plastic bag containing dismembered human remains. Authorities rushed to the scene and quickly realized that the bag didn't contain a whole body. After a search of Snake River, they discovered a total of 5 black garbage bags containing female human remains. They later confirmed that they were Kristen David's remains. The remains had been wrapped in pages from a local newspaper dated April 1981. Her clothing, blue 10-speed bicycle, and other personal items have never been found. When Kristen David's remains were found, investigators hoped to extract DNA evidence from the plastic bags. However, in 1981, DNA technology was still in its infancy. While they could potentially collect biological samples, available methods were limited to basic blood typing and other rudimentary analysis. Without a suspect to compare DNA to, any genetic material they might have recovered would have been effectively useless for identifying a perpetrator. Due to the area where she went missing and the location where her remains found, several different law enforcement agencies were involved in her case, both Idaho and Washington. As the case became more complex, the FBI eventually joined the effort. However, despite extensive investigations, Kristen's killer has never been identified. 18-year-old Jacqueline Brandy Miller and her stepsister, 21-year-old Christina Nelson, left Christina's apartment to walk to a nearby store on the evening of September 12, 1982. Nelson left a note for her boyfriend before they left, stating they would return soon. But the girls didn't return. The same evening that Miller and Nelson vanished, 35-year-old Stephen Pearsall also went missing. He had been dropped off at the Lewiston Civic Theater around midnight by his girlfriend, with plans of doing laundry at the machines and practicing his clarinet. Pearsall also worked at the theater as a janitor. He vanished that evening, leaving behind his clarinet, which friends claim is very uncharacteristic of him, as it was a prized possession of his. Brandy Miller, Christina Nelson, and Stephen Pearsall were all connected through the Lewiston Civic Theater in Lewiston, Idaho. Christina and Brandy were students at the Lewis Clark State College and had ties to the theater where they occasionally worked. Stephen Pearsall was employed as a janitor at the same theater and was known to spend time there practicing his clarinet. Their shared association with the theater has led investigators to consider a potential link in their disappearances, as all three were last seen or planned to be at or near the theater on the night they vanished. Initially, police considered Pearsall a suspect in the girls' disappearances due to his proximity to the case. He had associations with both the theater and the girls, and was present at the scene around the time it was believed the girls were there. However, investigators later ruled him out as a suspect. Pearsall himself had disappeared. His car was still at home. His personal belongings, such as his clarinet, were left behind at the theater. And at home, he had left behind an uncashed check from work. According to those who were questioned, while yes, Pearsall did know the girls, his relationship with them was more like that of a big brother, rather than anything hostile or unfriendly. In short, there was a huge lack of evidence to truly suggest his involvement, or that he was even hiding out somewhere. Instead, investigators started to suspect that he had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time, most likely witnessing a crime being committed against the girls, and whoever was responsible for their disappearances was also responsible for Pearsall's. There were reports of a man and 2 girls hitchhiking just outside of Lewiston, but this didn't generate any progress in the case. Another theory was that it was possible the trio had left to join a cult, but this also was a fruitless hypothesis. In March of 1984, a 15-year-old boy, Marvin Mead, was out collecting cans in a rural area near Lewiston, Idaho, when he made a grim discovery. After collecting his cans, he headed back towards his truck through the tree line when a gray object caught his eye. Thinking it was just some animal bones that might be neat to put on display, he picked it up, only to realize that it was a human skull. When authorities arrived at the scene, they found not just a single human skull, but two badly decomposed female bodies. The bodies would be identified as Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller. To this day, the remains or the whereabouts of Steve Purcell have never been found. The intertwined communities of Lewis Clark Valley were once seen as safe havens, tight-knit towns where neighbors knew each other, and the sense of security felt unshakable. But with 5 victims, 3 of whose deaths have been confirmed as homicides and 2 remaining mysteries, the sense of peace was shattered, leaving residents grappling with the unsettling reality that such tragedies could unfold in their own backyards. While investigators suspected the cases may be connected, no definitive evidence has linked them to a singular predator. Theories have emerged about potential serial killer operating in the area, but without concrete proof or a suspect, the truth remains shrouded in mystery, leaving the families and communities desperate for answers and closure. For a small period of time, one notorious serial killer and drifter became a suspect in the Lewis Clark Valley case: Otis Toole. Otis Elwood Toole was born March 5, 1947, in Jacksonville, Florida, and his early life was marked by severe trauma and dysfunction. His father was an alcoholic who abandoned the family, while his mother was abusive and reportedly forced him to wear girls' clothes, calling him Susan. Toole also claimed that his grandmother, a self-proclaimed Satanist, exposed him to disturbing rituals, including grave robbing and self-mutilation. Toole suffered from developmental disabilities, with an IQ of 75, and he had epilepsy, which caused frequent seizures. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade and began engaging in petty crimes. As a teenager, he frequented gay bars and became involved in prostitution. Later, Toole would admit to being sexually aroused by fire and became a serial arsonist. In the 1970s, Toole formed a disturbing partnership with fellow serial killer Henry Lee Lucas. Together, they claimed responsibility for hundreds of murders across the United States, though many of their confessions were later discredited. Toole was convicted of multiple murders, including the high-profile case of Adam Walsh, though doubts remain about the validity of some of his confessions. He died in prison in 1996 from cirrhosis of the liver, leaving behind a legacy of horror and unanswered questions.
You. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Once upon a time, in the land of everyday moments, there lived a sprinkle of magic called icing sugar photography. From sticky cake smash smiles to wind-swept yes moments, they capture the sugar sweet, the beautifully messy, and everything in between. Whether you're a blushing bride or a blooming family, or just want to freeze time for a second, icing sugar photography is your fairy god lens. Visit icingsugarphotography.com and follow along on Instagram at icingsugarphoto. Let your story sparkle, because life is sweet and memories should be too. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit PayYourRent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
Toole was considered a suspect in the Lewis Clark Valley case due to several factors that aligned with his known criminal behavior and the circumstances surrounding the disappearances and murders. Toole was an active serial killer during the late 1970s and early 1980s, the same period when the Lewis Clark Valley cases occurred. His history of targeting vulnerable individuals, particularly women and children, matched the profile of the victims in these cases. Additionally, Toole was known to travel extensively across the United States, often drifting through small towns and rural areas, which made it plausible that he could have been in the region during the time of these crimes. The brutality of the murders, including the dismemberment of Kristen David, was consistent with Toole's violent tendencies and his history of gruesome acts. Investigators noted similarities between the methods used in the Lewis Clark Valley cases and other crimes Toole had admitted to, although many of his confessions were later discredited. His partnership with Henry Lee Lucas further complicated matters, as the two often claimed responsibility for murders they didn't commit, making it difficult for law enforcement to separate fact from fiction. Furthermore, the Idaho State Police reported in 1984 that Toole had implicated himself in the murder of Kristen David, while noting that two other individuals had also confessed to the crime. Despite these factors, no concrete evidence ever linked Toole to the Lewis Clark Valley cases. His confessions were notoriously unreliable, and investigators were unable to place him definitively in the area at the time of the crimes. The lack of physical evidence and the challenges of coordinating investigators across multiple jurisdictions left his involvement unproven. A huge problem with the case was that it spanned multiple jurisdictions, involving law enforcement agencies from both Idaho and Washington. The disappearances and the murders occurred across state lines, with victims last seen in places like Lewiston, Idaho, Asotin, and Washington. The remains discovered in areas such as Snake River. This geographical spread meant that local police departments, county sheriffs, and even state authorities had to collaborate, which often led to challenges in communication and coordination. Each agency has its own protocol and policies and priorities, making it difficult to streamline the investigation. Despite these challenges, there was one individual who stood out as suspicious to all of the involved agencies. This person had connections to several of the victims and was known to frequent the areas where the crimes occurred. As of 2025, this person has not been criminally charged and is still living. To protect their identity and for legal purposes, this person will be referred to as Jim. And Jim has a possible connection to every victim, as well as an unsavory past. When Christina White went missing, one person was especially eager to help: Jim. He was an active participant in all the efforts to locate her, showing an unusual level of interest and engagement. While community members often rally together in such situations, police noted that Jim's behavior went beyond what was typical for an innocent bystander. This level of investment is sometimes seen in perpetrators, who may involve themselves in searches as a way to monitor the investigation and gauge what information authorities have. One of the reasons this struck out to authorities was because Jim lived in Christina White's neighborhood. In fact, she had been seen at his home several times before. There are also witness statements indicating that she was seen at his residence on the day she disappeared, and Jim had admitted to seeing her before she vanished. Jim's connection to Kristen David begins with his work-related deliveries near her last known location along U.S. Highway 95, where she was seen cycling the last day she disappeared. Witnesses reported seeing a man in a brown vehicle approaching female cyclists and pedestrians along the highway, and Jim owned a vehicle matching that description, which of course raised suspicions. Furthermore, Jim and Kristen had a prior association through the Lewiston Civic Theater, where they had both worked. Jim often performed there. The theater is also a connection to the other three victims: Brandy Miller, Christina Nelson, and Stephen Purcell. In fact, Jim had stated to seeing Purcell at the theater the evening of the triple's disappearance. Police called him in for questioning when the trio first went missing. Their working theory was that he must have seen Nelson and Miller on the street that evening and offered them a ride. As they knew him, they accepted. But instead of taking them home, he took them to the theater where he could kill them. And unfortunately, this is where Purcell must have seen them and was killed to prevent there being any witnesses. During the questioning, Jim confessed not only to seeing Purcell that night, but also to returning to the theater and spending the night there. He gave the police a story about injuring himself and then laying down to take a nap, but he claims he never heard the other three or anyone else enter the building that night. He did say that he pulled his vehicle around to the back of the building at one point, but it was only to load up some of his tools that he had been using to build a set. After the discovery of Nelson and Miller's bodies, Jim was brought in once again for questioning. His story remained the same. However, given the layout of the building, investigators did believe that he couldn't have heard someone enter the building, given where he claimed to have been sleeping. Jim was given the opportunity to take a lie detector test, but denied, citing that his lawyers recommended he no longer cooperate with the investigation. When investigators started to look into Jim's past, it was scarred with questionable events. At one point, Jim had dated a woman named Claudette Bolvaya, who reportedly committed suicide, and Jim was the one who found her body, according to friends of his. He had also met her through the theater as well. Jim also had a criminal record due to an incident in California where he was arrested for breaking into a funeral home. The case involved the body of a 17-year-old girl who had died under mysterious circumstances. When he broke in, there were 2 other teenage girls in the home as well. He was arrested with a hunting knife on him, and it's unclear as to whether he was there to disturb the corpse or if he was there for the other girls. Diane Taylor, an 8-year-old girl, was last seen August 1st, 1963, walking down an alley behind the Austin YMCA in Chicago, Illinois. where she attended day camp. Witnesses reported that Diane had asked to see a counselor to help her unwrap a lollipop before heading down the alley alone. Tragically, her body was discovered 2 days later on August 3rd, behind a building in the Austin community. Diane had been stabbed in the heart and suffered multiple lacerations. Her autopsy revealed that she had been killed approximately 36 hours before her body was found. Authorities believed that she was murdered elsewhere and her body was dumped in the alley. At the time of her death, Jim was working as a youth camp counselor at the YMCA, where Diane attended. His role at the camp placed him in proximity to Diane during her last known moments, and he was among the 750 male students from Austin High School questioned by law enforcement during the investigation. While Jim was never considered a suspect, his connection to the camp and Diane's tragic death has remained a point of interest in discussions about his past, and some believe that she was his first victim. Jim has never been charged in connection with the Lewis-Clark Valley cases due to a lack of concrete evidence tying him to the case. While his proximity to the victims and the locations associated with their disappearances raised suspicions, investigators were unable to uncover physical evidence or eyewitness accounts that definitively linked him to the murders. An absence of forensic proof, such as DNA or fingerprints, made it impossible to build a strong case for prosecution. Additionally, 2 of the victims remain missing, further complicating efforts to establish a clear connection. Despite the circumstantial evidence and his troubling history, the legal standard for proof required for charges has not been met. In 1990, when John Jeffers took over the investigation in the Lewis-Clark Valley cases, he worked to unify the efforts of various law enforcement agencies involved. One of the key challenges was the geographical spread of the case, which spanned multiple jurisdictions in Idaho and Washington. Jeffers emphasized the importance of collaboration, particularly as all the agencies had begun focusing on Jim as the primary suspect. During this time, a tip surfaced that Jim had poured concrete into the basement of his property, raising suspicions that it might be to conceal evidence related to the case. Investigators followed up on this lead, but unfortunately, the search yielded no useful findings. Despite this setback, Jeffers continued to push for a coordinated approach, consolidating evidence and sharing information across agencies in the hopes of finally solving these haunting cases. Detective Jackie Nichols took over the investigation in Lewis-Clark Valley case in 2007 when she joined the Asotin County Sheriff's Office. Being based in Asotin, Nichols naturally focused her efforts on Christina White's disappearance, as Christina was last seen in the area. Nichols meticulously reviewed the case files and conducted re-interviews with individuals who had been questioned during the initial investigation. Her goal was to uncover any overlooked details or inconsistencies that could provide new leads. Nichols believed that Christine's case was deeply intertwined with the other disappearances and murders, and she worked tirelessly to connect the dots. Throughout her investigation, Nichols came to suspect that Jim was involved in 4 out of the 5 cases. She noted his proximity to the victims and the crime scenes, as well as his troubling history and behavior. Nichols believed that Jim's connection to Christina White, Christina Nelson, and Brandy Miller, as well as Stephen Pearsall, were too significant to ignore. However, Kristen David's case stood out as slightly different. Kristen's dismembered remains were found in garbage bags along Snake River, and the method of disposal was far more gruesome and calculated than the other cases. Nichols acknowledged that Kristen's murder might have been committed by the same person, but also considered the possibility that it was unrelated due to the stark differences in the crime's executions. Harry Hantman, a convicted murderer, was implicated in the brutal killing of an 11-year-old girl named Donna Lee Evans in 1968. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a psychiatric facility. However, in 1937, Hantman escaped from the hospital and went on the run, evading capture for nearly 2 decades. During this time, he hid out in a remote cabin located near Idaho-Oregon border. In 1993, authorities finally apprehended him, bringing his years of evasion to an end. Detective Jackie Nichols suspected that he might have been capable of murdering Kristen David. After all, he was only a short distance away from where she had been killed. Nichols visited Hantman's cabin as part of her efforts to connect him to Kristen's murder. During the search, she discovered plastic bags buried on the property, which were similar to the ones used to dispose of Kristen's dismembered remains. However, investigators were unable to locate the original bags used in Kristen's case, which were crucial for lifting DNA evidence. The inability to find these bags was likely due to the passage of time and environmental factors, such as weathering and decomposition, which may have destroyed or scattered the evidence. Additionally, the remote and rugged terrain surrounding the cabin made it challenging to conduct a thorough search. Without the original bags, investigators could not establish a definitive link between Hantman and Kristen's murder, leaving his involvement speculative. Not everyone in law enforcement believed that Jim was responsible for all the Lewis-Clark Valley cases. While he was undoubtedly a strong person of interest in many of the cases, some law enforcement noticed striking differences between victims, the methods used to commit the crimes, and how the bodies were handled, which led to questions about whether multiple perpetrators might be involved. The victims' profiles varied considerably. Christina White was just 12 years old, while Kristen David was a 21-year-old college student. Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller, aged 21 and 18 respectively, were stepsisters, while Stephen Pearsall was a 35-year-old man. The diversity in age, gender, and life circumstances didn't fit the pattern of a typical serial killer, who often targets specific types of victims. The methods of operation also didn't follow consistent patterns. Christina White disappeared without a trace, leaving no evidence behind. Kristen David's case was extraordinarily violent. Her body was dismembered, wrapped in newspapers, and placed in garbage bags along the Snake River. By contrast, Christina Nelson and Brandy Miller were found together on the hillside, but a cause of death was undefined for Christina, while Brandy's death was confirmed a homicide. And Stephen Pearsall's body has never been recovered. Traditional FBI profiling techniques struggle to make sense of these cases. Profiling typically relies on patterns of behavior and victimology, but these cases defy those expectations. If Jim were indeed the perpetrator behind the Lewis-Clark Valley cases, he would stand out as a unique type of serial killer. FBI agent Bradley Garrett, who analyzed the case, noted that it is highly uncommon for a serial killer to target individuals they personally know. This observation adds a layer of complexity to the investigation, as Jim's connection to several of the victims challenged the typical profile of a serial offender. Kristen David murder, in particular, stands out due to the calculated and methodical manner in which her remains were disposed of, a level of planning and brutality distinct from the other cases. These differences continue to divide investigators. Some believe that one killer could have adapted their methods over time or targeted victims opportunistically, while others are convinced that multiple killers operated in the area, each responsible for a different crime. Not all cases fit profiling techniques. The Colonial Parkway murders in Virginia provided a striking parallel to the Lewis-Clark Valley case, and their ability to defy FBI profiling and challenge traditional investigation techniques. Between 1986 and 1989, 4 double homicides occurred along the Colonial Parkway, a scenic route in Virginia. The victims were couples, and the case remains unsolved to this day. The first known victims, Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, were found in 1986 in Thomas's car, which had been pushed down an embankment near the York River. Both women had been strangled and their throats slashed. In 1987, David Nobbing and Robin Edwards were found shot to death near the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. The following year, Robert Call and Cassandra Haley disappeared after a date. Their car was found abandoned, but their bodies were never recovered. And finally, in 1989, Daniel Lyer and Anna Marie Phelps were discovered in the wooded area off Interstate 64. Their remains too decomposed to determine the exact cause of death. What makes the Colonial Parkway murders so perplexing is the lack of consistent MO. The methods of killing varied: strangulation, stabbing, and shooting, and the locations ranged from secluded areas to more accessible spots. The victims also differed in age and background, with some being college students and others young professionals. These inconsistencies made it nearly impossible for FBI profilers to establish a clear pattern or profile of the killer. Like the Lewis Clark case, the Colonial Parkway murders have led to debates about whether a singular perpetrator was responsible or if multiple killers were involved. Some investigators believe that the differences in the case suggest separate offenders, while others argue that one killer could have adapted their methods over time and again chosen victims opportunistically. Christina Nelson's cousin Gloria Bobberts has been a steadfast advocate for justice, never giving up on finding the person responsible for Christina's murder. Gloria has spent decades keeping Christina's memory alive and pushing for answers in the Lewis Clark Valley case. She firmly believes that Jim is guilty and has voiced her convictions publicly, urging investigators to continue pursuing leads that might connect him to the crimes. Today, the investigation into the Lewis Clark Valley case is in the hands of the FBI, who are working to uncover new evidence and bring closure to the victims' families. The FBI has established tip lines to encourage anyone with information about these cases to come forward. Tips can be submitted anonymously, and investigators remain hopeful that even the smallest detail could provide a breakthrough in solving these decade-old mysteries. If you have any information about the Lewis Clark Valley case, you can contact 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can also visit Lewis Clark Valley Serial Killer Facebook page, which was created by Gloria. The Lewis Clark Valley case, like many unsolved mysteries, leaves behind more than just unanswered questions. They create a lingering unease that haunts small communities for generations. Patterns often emerge in the minds of killers, driving their decisions and actions. But when those patterns elude understanding, it disrupts the logic investigation relies on. In these cases, the lack of clarity defies FBI profiling and challenges conventional methods of crime solving, forcing law enforcement to confront the unpredictability of human behavior. For the families of the victims and the communities impacted, the absence of answers is a heavy burden. Small towns thrive on connection and shared trust, yet tragedies like these unravel the fabric, leaving a sense of vulnerability that doesn't fade with time. As long as these cases remain unsolved, they cast shadows over the lives of everyone touched by them. The search for justice continues, but so does the haunting question: how could these crimes happen? And why do the answers remain just out of reach? As the shadows deepen along the crooked path, let the haunting mystery of the Lewis Clark Valley remind us of how little we truly know of the darkness that can linger in small communities. These unanswered questions challenge our understanding, forcing us to confront not only our fears, but the fragility of justice in the face of the unknown. This is Amanda Joy, signing off from Down the Crooked Path. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and let the secrecies of our world light your way forward. Until next time.